I saw the number 90 on the rice bag to microwave it for 90 seconds to warm it up. I was like, that's it, 90-second mycology. Mycology, study of fungi, cultivation, and that was it. He tested the psilocybin content of mushrooms grown on brown rice compared to other mushrooms on other grains. The brown rice produced pretty potent magic mushrooms. So all of that together coincides with brown rice being a great grain to use as a base for magic mushrooms. If you've never seen an oyster mushroom, they have like these big, beautiful, thick caps that kind of stem from a mushroom stem. If they have too much carbon dioxide buildup, they never develop those big, beautiful caps. They just turn into a long, stringy stem, and there's no mushroom. Number one mistake is people they're misting it too much, spraying too much water on their mushrooms and not letting them get enough fresh air, or they get too much fresh air because they're looking at them every day, trying to peek at it.
If you don't think we live in a world of magic, then I highly recommend you try out some mushrooms. You're here with Mark Boutwell and 90-second mycology. Let's go ahead and get into the video. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and make sure to check us out on Instagram, Facebook, and if you haven't checked out the $2.99 membership, I highly recommend do so. If you need a little more one-on-one, make sure to check out the VIP link down below in the description.
Hi, I'm Mike. How are you?
Good. I'm Frank. I'm the creator of 90-second mycology, and I'm honored to be with you guys. I love these worlds crossing right now.
So after my process of removing my flower, I have all this extra sterile fiber, and I was looking at that. It could be used for hamster feed. It could be used as a cow feed as you put them in. But since it's so sterile, and I had it analyzed, there's no THC, there's nothing in it. There's no nutritional value very much after we remove the flower. I want to use it as biomass to grow our cultures of mushrooms, and we'll be able to recycle it, use it as a growing medium.
Yeah, so you bring up, hamster feed and all of that. I've been down a deep rabbit hole researching the difference between hay and straw. Right. Straw comes from the byproduct of growing grains, grain plants like wheat, sorghum, millet. That straw doesn't really have a lot of nutritional value, but there's a lot of biomass there that mushrooms love to grow on. And hay is the same thing, but it's grown specifically for nutrition to eat, from animals. And once you're left with all this biomass, I believe it really could be used. And you cross these two worlds where you have this byproduct from the cannabis plant, and like you said, it's sterilized, it's dried out, it's ready to go. Maybe you could rehydrate it, pasteurize it even, and use that as a medium. One of the most prolific fruiters of mushrooms are oyster mushrooms, which are gourmet edible mushrooms. And oysters are just like weeds. Like, they will consume anything, they will grow anywhere. No pun intended, of course. So I think the best species of mushroom to start testing that on is a species of oyster mushrooms, like pink oysters or blue oyster mushrooms. You can find, there's a lot of mushroom videos from people out in the Philippines, and they mostly grow oyster mushrooms on all of these different mediums like that. And sometimes you'd be surprised. So I think bringing the cannabis stalks into the picture could really be pretty cool. No, it's great. That was already a great topic. I didn't even think about that. All the cannabis growers and the byproduct, that is a great, that's a great thing. Definitely worth experimenting with. So I texted Mark earlier. So cannabis was one of my big passions. But unfortunately, for some reason, I wanted to get into truck driving. So here in the United States, unfortunately, I can't consume cannabis because they test us, randomly, federally. So I've grown a couple plants myself, actually, when I was younger, in a computer tower, a gutted computer case, the old PC case grow. Yeah. That was the best thing. It was so cool. And I've always been into like botany and horticulture. I just love growing stuff. So it would be great to, grow some THC neutral, what do you guys call it? CBD plants, hemp pretty much that doesn't have any THC. Well, I knew a little bit about cannabis growing, I was into it, at the time, and times have changed a lot since I was last into it before I became a commercial driver, and I couldn't partake in it anymore, unfortunately. But, it's always been a passion of mine. And I think combining these two worlds would be great, and figuring out how exactly you've already got the worlds that are combined. You've already got cannabis growers and cannabis consumers that are growing mushrooms. That's either it's one or the other, or it's both. And if we combine it, I think that'd be a great project.
There's actually some, something hit me a couple weeks ago. Frank, it's a pleasure to meet you, man. I really love your channel. Man. I love your simplicity. Just everything you do. So many people, I think, overcomplicate.
That's what it's all about. You keep it simple in everything.
Everything.
Hey, listen. Sorry, Mark, I don't want to cut you off, but just to Frank to get to it. So you see, when I started growing, all you need was a seed and a shovel, and I think it's the best way to go.
I was going to bring that up. Like, now cannabis growing, you've got it all set up. Back when I started, it was always Fox Farm, this and that. But cannabis is a weed, like I mentioned earlier with the oyster mushrooms. A weed is a weed. It wants to grow. Put the seed in the soil, and you'll see grows like on Reddit.com. Some first-time grower. I threw this seed in the soil. They ended up, with so much bud material without even trying anything, and everyone's freaking out like, wow, you got so lucky. But I mean, that's just how it is. If you're meant to get it, you put in the work and the effort, you never know what you're going to get out of it. Let's get into mushrooms. So what I noticed, I love your guys' channel, because actually I didn't know too much about it until, I don't know if it was Mark. I don't know who reached out to me on Instagram with that one account.
Well,
I'm not sure which one it was.
We have a team.
Oh, it was okay. So yeah. I mean, as soon as I looked up the channel and I was all into it, I'm like, damn, how did I miss this? This is great stuff.
A few people came across you, and then we're posting your videos up, and a lot of people were really into it, because it's cool how you're going through simple mediums that you can get for like less than $2, and then you're inoculating that, and then you're able to create that as like the host, and then you're able to mix that in with the medium later on.
The rice bags and the grain spawn. Yeah. If you do it right, it works. Everybody hates. There's always going to be haters with everything everybody does, but it works, and it works for a lot of people, because we have the subreddit, the Uncle Ben subreddit. I didn't make that, but I'm like a moderator of it. So there's a lot of testimonial that this stuff works to grow mushrooms at home. Especially like guys like you who don't know anything about it. Maybe you learn the very basics. You go to the store, and I think like up in Canada, it's like Uncle Ben's, I think it's like Express is on the packaging, but it's the same thing, 90-second rice, brown rice. Yeah. And I have that hour-long documentary on my channel about fruiting the mushrooms directly from the bag. And like, that is the perfect amount for somebody who just wants to barely get into it, see what it's about. You got the perfect amount of mushrooms, and that's it. The whole mushroom culture has always been about, well, you want to grow mushrooms, immediately spend, $200 on a pressure cooker. You got to learn how to prepare your grains, and you immediately got to buy all this substrate. But that's why I looked the one day. I didn't create the Uncle Ben's technique or anything like that. That's been around for a while. The one day I was playing with it, because I had already grown before with the traditional methods, and I was like, I saw the number 90 on the rice bag to microwave it for 90 seconds to warm it up. I was like, that's it, 90-second mycology. Mycology, study of fungi, cultivation, and that was it, 90-second mycology. And as soon as I said that in my head, I'm like, it's going to be all about simplicity, simple things that you can do, cheap. You don't have to go crazy, and it works. No pressure cookers. That's what I'm all about. No pressure cookers, although I do cater to both sides. People who do end up seeing this, who are veteran mushroom growers, I cater to both sides, beginners and veterans on the channel.
That was actually one of the reasons why I was so attracted to your channel, and really kind of just getting into it. With Perfect Gardens, I really love just going back to the core concept of what we were talking about, KISS, keep it simple, stupid, right? And I was wanting to get into a new, really like Mike was saying, and Hayes, we wanted to get into a new, like a new food, or we wanted to get into mushrooms, or just something else besides cannabis. It's already 500 videos on the cannabis plant. And right. We're getting into fertilizers, and we're getting to all these things, and we're starting to create this connection, right? Like chitin, right? And these, I think it's chitin. Oh, it's chitin. Anyways, where the mushrooms are attaching the endo and the exto, and they're creating relationships with the roots. And yeah. I just thought, your channel, just like how you said, that 90-second, where it just shows someone, listen, you can grow with this. Just buy this, start with this, get started.
and don't overcomplicate it. You don't need to buy all this stuff. I mean, you can,
Yeah.
and there's a purpose for it. And if you wanted to get into production
course.
growing, all that stuff, it's
Yeah.
phenomenal.
I always say you want to move on, you always can, but don't forget where you started with 90-second mycology.
Exactly. Just keeping it simple. And if there was another voice to start the mycology of just the mycology or the mushrooms and how to get started, how to educate our growers to get started, I wanted it to be someone like you. Just like, how do you get and give you that platform? You already have a platform, obviously, but there's a lot of guys in the cannabis side that haven't gotten to mushrooms that want to, and they're partaking in it, whatever. And they have all the equipment for it, but just like anything else, it's very easy for them to overcomplicate the process when getting started. And I wanted to just
exactly.
start off with these first few questions we had was best materials to start for starting.
Oh yeah, best materials. So it's going to be your basic 90-second rice bag, and it's actually better. I'm loyal to the Uncle Ben brand because it's just, that's what we've always known. But the generic 90-second rice bags are actually a little bit better. They have there's less moisture in it, because you'll learn later when you're cultivating mushrooms, when you inoculate these grains, you can use either a spore solution or a liquid culture solution, which I have a video on my channel which explains the difference between the two, if you don't know the difference. And that will throw off the moisture content. The number one problem is always, the grains will get too wet before the mycelium can actually germinate or continue to take over. So to get started, it's always the 90-second rice bags, a little bit of the cocoa coir substrate, and a spore syringe. If you can get spores, there are some states here in the United States where even the spores are illegal, and you can find avenues where people will still sell you the spores. And I think it's like 3 states, like Georgia, Idaho, and California, I think, are illegal states just for mushroom spores right now. So people in those states have problems, but you can still get into growing gourmet and medicinal mushrooms with the same techniques. Like I was talking to Mike earlier, oysters are prolific fruiters. You can fruit oyster mushrooms with just the brown rice and the cocoa coir alone. You get like a liquid culture syringe, and that can get you started in just growing your own mushrooms at home. But of course, you could also go on Amazon or any other website and get a mushroom fruiting kit, a basic gourmet fruiting kit, because in the United States, you can't find those magic fruiting kits. We have weird laws about active mycelium where they believe the mycelium is active. It contains the psilocybin, so the mycelium itself is illegal. But I think up in Canada, the mycelium and the liquid culture is actually legal, but the fruits aren't. I don't know it's like some weird laws like that in between Canada and the United States.
Frank, I can clarify you. They relaxed all those laws. They removed them. They are selling psychedelic mushrooms on the internet openly. So.
Oh, you know what? You're right. I remember seeing posts. Oh, this guy was like, I got this online. I think it was like from British Columbia or something, and it was just a bag of dried mushrooms with the label on it and the dosage, and that was I remember that now. So to get started, you just need your grains, sterile grains, the 90-second rice, either a spore or mushroom liquid culture syringe, and then some of the cocoa coir substrate. And then once you get that stuff, you can expand on that. You can add like vermiculite to it, some gypsum. The vermiculite will help retain the moisture. The gypsum adds some calcium and sulfur, which mushrooms love. And mushrooms are like 95% water. So the more moisture you can provide to them through the substrate, the bigger the mushrooms and the mushroom mass you can get. So just simple ingredients, simple stuff to get started. Well, I call them ingredients, but they're supplies. Same thing.
One of
it's all about.
One of the things you brought up about edible mushrooms versus magic mushrooms, and also some things we talk about occasionally on the channel, is the lack of awareness of how much these plants or spores actually produce, in a single batch. And when you take a small moment to really think about it, like, I never try to encourage anyone to get out there and get into the commercial side of things. The commercial side, unless it's in food production or other stuff.
No, you always want to start simple.
Keep it simple.
Don't do that.
And that you're going to create a target in your life. Things could happen where it's just not worth the consequence. But when you think about the amount that's capable of being produced in just such a small area, well, you produced all your medicine for what, a year, a year and a half, right?
Even beyond that, and guys are like, what do I do now? I used one bag of Uncle Ben's and I ended up with like ounces and ounces of mushrooms, magic mushrooms. I'm not going to eat them all within the year. And that's how it is. You're right. Yeah.
And we gotta, in my viewpoint, is starting to change or adjust our priority system from, you know, the can of flour and the fruiting of the mushrooms to actually being like, you know what else are these oyster mushrooms good on? Or how do you cook them? Or how do you get into that? Like, you take the education or the thought process of extracting the oils off the canna plant, and it's probably similar to extracting the psilocybin off of the mushrooms to make them water soluble, right? And so
same thing. Yeah. You know, lion's mane is another big medicinal mushroom. They call it the brain food. There's a lot of lion's mane extracts out there like that too.
Absolutely, right. And so I'm always trying to get people to take their knowledge and what they've accumulated. And a lot of people, they become masters at their world, but they're very intimidated to take that knowledge and their foundation and reapply it to another industry or reapply it to another plant, and then just keep repeating that process to the point where you become a master grower in your environment. And so once again, I'll ask you that we're going to ask you why using 90-second rice was so important. You kind of dived into that question, and just, will you reiterate again? It was,
yeah. So the simplicity alone of 90-second rice, you've got like $1 bag of sterile grains right in your grocery store. Now, of course, you can go online, you can go on Etsy, Amazon, any vendor website, and buy pre-sterilized grains in what we call the unicorn mushroom grow bags. Unicorn is just a brand name for the mushroom bags you see with the filter patch on them and all that. So brand new growers, of course, you can go online and find a vendor and buy that stuff. Or if you don't even know what's going on, you can go right to your grocery store and find this $1 bag of sterilized brown rice. Brown rice is an awesome growing medium for mushrooms. And I did a live stream on my channel. It's a few months ago now, but I have a playlist on my channel with all of my past live streams. And it was a history of indoor magic mushroom cultivation. And I found, are you guys familiar with the Irrwood.org? You remember that old website with trip reports and stuff on it?
Tell us a little bit about it.
I cited an Irrwood.org article from Stephen Pollack. Well, it's not from him, but it mentions Stephen Pollack, where he tested the psilocybin content of mushrooms grown on brown rice compared to other mushrooms on other grains. The brown rice produced pretty potent magic mushrooms. So all of that together coincides with brown rice being a great grain to use as a base for magic mushrooms. And it's right there in your store, 90-second microwavable brown rice. And a lot of people always ask, well, do I have to cook it for 90 seconds? But no, you don't. It's pre-sterilized. It's ready to eat off the shelf, or what I like to say, it's ready to inoculate. That 90 seconds is just to warm it up so you have some warm rice. So it all just kind of plays together. A lot of people think, oh, 90 seconds. They think my videos are going to be 90 seconds long. But it's like quite the contrary. You know, they're an hour or 40 minutes and they go, what the hell is this? And then they're like, oh, the rice, 90-second rice.
I was one of those people. So, I was like, why are all these videos longer than 90 seconds? I don't get it.
And you go, oh, yeah. Because if you see those advanced videos where I don't even talk about 90-second rice, you're like, what the hell is this? But when you get into the 90-second rice videos, you go, oh, okay. And that's when you learn that you've got this $1 or, a little over $1, it depends on where you get it, bag of rice, whether it's name brand or generic, perfect to use as mushroom grain spawn. And actually, so there's a difference between like the substrates and the grain spawn. I just released a video because a lot of people wanted some flow charts, like brand new beginner mushroom cultivators, simple flow charts. Well, how does a mushroom cycle work? The life cycle. So I have a flow chart video and it's on my website. Like I think it's 90secondmycology.com/flowcharts. And you'll see the life cycle of a mushroom. It's to grow it indoors, you take your culture or spores into the grain, then the grain colonizes, take the colonized grain to the substrate, let the substrate colonize, then it's ready for fruiting and all of that. There's different steps involved, obviously, but that's the simplistic idea of it.
So thank you. I apologize.
Oh,
so
go, yeah.
Let me repeat what you just said, just to kind of simplify it in my mind, because again, I want to get started in this, especially edible
Yeah, for
mushrooms. I'm
sure. Yeah.
getting into cooking mostly. So really, we're using the rice more as a initial media, kind of like a clone, right? Where we take a clone and we put it into the plug, and we get the root started. And then once we get the
Yeah.
root started, we transfer it into
Yeah.
our other growing media to get that established, calling that colonization. Is that, I'm trying to
It's
connect it.
similar.
Is it similar to that?
It's very similar. Yeah, you can break it down that way because a lot of beginners think that mushroom spores are like seeds, but that's not true. It's actually the colonized grain that's more like the mushroom seeds because you need the spores to germinate to grow the mycelium. And then if you put that into grains, now you've got individual colonized grains that you mix throughout the hydrated pasteurized substrate, and those become like the little mycelium seeds because you need
Wow.
those little moisture and nutrient reservoirs throughout the substrate to help grow the mushrooms. Obviously, mushrooms out in the wild are not growing off of, wild grains, but to bring the process indoors or like a controlled outdoor grow, when you have that colonized grain, they act as like little mushroom seeds that you can spread throughout your substrate or outdoor mushroom bed. And that kind of acts like little mushroom anchors, little mycelium anchors that are full of moisture and nutrition to help those mushrooms kind of grow from the seed. And the mycelium can be thought of as the roots, and then the substrate can be thought of as like the soil because that soil or substrate is giving it nutrition and more moisture as it continues to grow into a full mushroom.
It's really interesting. As you're talking, I kind of imagine seeing the mushroom spore as a parasite, and it's like changing the DNA of the rice to so it can create its seed.
So mushrooms, they're pretty similar to humans. So what they do is they actually just digest their food. They'll digest it and break it down. So pretty much, I guess maybe you could think of it as a parasite. But it's really just kind of breaking down that grain and breaking down the substrate. It's consuming it and using that as its fuel, kind of like we consume food as humans. And when mushrooms are fully fruited, they exhale carbon dioxide and they inhale oxygen just like humans as well.
So very interesting. How much CO2 does mushrooms release? Like let's say, like, I don't know, have you ever done any of those type of experiments on?
I've never actually had a meter or anything, but that is an interesting question because a lot of gourmet mushrooms, like oyster mushrooms, they're pretty sensitive to carbon dioxide buildup, and you'll see them start to mutate and deform. I don't know if you've never seen an oyster mushroom, they have like these big, beautiful, thick caps that kind of stem from a mushroom stem. And if they have too much carbon dioxide buildup, they never develop those big, beautiful caps. They just turn into a long, stringy stem, and there's no mushroom. So yeah, I've never.
Is you wouldn't ventilate, say you were growing in a tub and you didn't ventilate, that would be a sign that you have.
That would be, yes. If you were growing, yeah, like if same thing with magic mushrooms. If you don't give them enough air in a tub or a shoebox, the bases become extra fuzzy. Keep stretching to try to find that fresh air at the top of the tub. So I've never metered the CO2, but you can definitely visually see it in the mushrooms when there's too much carbon dioxide in its environment like that. They start to mutate and get all weird.
So not to get too far off on this, everyone always talks about caps versus stems and there being a difference.
Oh yeah.
Right. Is this a way to manipulate the grow to get more stem and less cap, or more cap and less stem?
Technically, I think it could be if you really were into that concept. But a lot of experienced mushroom consumers will tell you there's no difference between cap and stem. That's personal until one day we can get the testing done, maybe. Each batch of mushrooms from spores is going to produce different genetics and alkaloid contents and stuff because every time you start from spores, those are brand new and unpredictable genetics. So spores are always producing something brand new until you actually clone or isolate the genetics. And then again, everybody's perception of consuming chemicals is different. So maybe to you, you grew a potent batch and you clone it, and now you're growing a potent batch for you. But then we share it with like Mike or Hayes, and he's like, I didn't feel anything. But to you, you're tripping balls. You know, everybody's subjective. So it's like we need actual numbers. We need like, actual testing to see. But I've always heard that too. Caps and stems. I only want caps or I only want stems. If you wanted to entertain that idea, you could manipulate the mushroom to start stretching, looking for that fresh air. Maybe you'll end up with tiny caps and really long stems if that's what you wanted to do.
Can I ask you one question?
Yeah.
Where on the mushroom where do the spores come from? Is it grown? Is it released all over the mushroom, or is it just in one certain area?
Yeah, so it depends. So there are different types of mushrooms. There's like what we call polypore or gilled mushrooms. So your typical psilocybe cubensis magic mushroom is a gilled mushroom with the cap. Underneath that cap, when it opens up, inside of those gills, the spores form. So if you have a mushroom grow inside of a tub or a shoebox, like we just mentioned, and you let the caps open all the way, and then you let them sit for too long, you'll see this black dust everywhere. And those are the spores that have dropped out of the caps. And that's
will
actually
those
how you take.
automatically regrow? Can you just pick a few and just leave those spores there and reset? Will they re-inoculate?
People have done that, but the best thing to do is to not let your mushrooms sporulate, because they can actually kind of suffocate the substrate. It's like a thick dust because it's microscopic spores. Spores are microscopic. So when you actually see like a mass, that's a lot of spores right there. So like you can wipe it with your finger and like that's a lot of spores. But that's how we take like spore prints. You cut the cap off of the stem before it actually kind of drops the spores, and you just place it on some foil in a still air environment. And within 24 hours, you've got a thick mushroom print on the foil, and that's all the spores. And then you can use that to grow, continue the life cycle and grow more mushrooms.
Okay, so just kind of repeating what you're saying. Are you saying, so you just cut so you have the cap and you have the stem, you cut it right there, and you just allow, just
put the cap on foil, put it inside of like a Tupperware container on a piece of foil, come back, even within 8 hours, take the cap off, and you'll have a mushroom print of spores.
You don't have to tap it or do anything fancy or scrape it or just let it sit.
No, they just release it. It's crazy. You'll come back in like 24 hours. It's a thick, dark print. So different mushrooms, different species of mushrooms have different colored spores.
Dry mushrooms.
The magic mushrooms,
right? Dry mushrooms is what you're discussing, not wet.
Well, wet. No, they are wet. Fresh. What? They got to be fresh, wet mushrooms that are still releasing spores, because you could, once you dry mushrooms out, they are still kind of dropping spores, but once you dry it out, so it's hard to explain. Like a lot of people think dried mushrooms are dead. And one of the videos that I want to work on in the future is actually starting a grow from dried mushrooms. That's not for beginners to discuss. There's a whole thing that goes into that. But when you have fresh, wet mushrooms, it's still releasing its spores, and you just simply place it on some foil and you get the spores to release. And then that cap is still good. You can dehydrate it or eat it fresh. Little mushroom snack.
This is so, whenever I have a first time conversation, I'm like, everything's profound. So I have to take a moment to digest.
Oh, I know.
What you're saying.
Crazy. Yeah, I know. You got to think about it. Like, man, what the hell?
Hold on. What? Okay. So you cannot do this can you get spores off dry?
Technically you could. Okay. So once a mushroom is dried, it's not like it's still, there's a debate if the mushroom is dead or still alive, but it's just kind of like in, it's stasis, or however you want to say it. There's a debate where you can take a dried mushroom and still swab the gills with like a sterile swab and get kind of that mushroom material and spores. And you take that to what we call agar. Agar is just, some people say agar. It's agar. It's a plant-based gelatin that's used for microbiology in the typical petri dishes. So there is a debate. Can dried mushrooms still, there could be spores left over during its life cycle, but you're going to get the most spores from a fresh, harvested cap. that you cut right off of the grow and put there on some foil. And
Is
it's
this
any
designed
mushroom,
to-
like oysters. What's that?
It's pretty much designed to get rid of all those spores, right? So it doesn't really
It
hold
just
on to
wants to
them.
reproduce. Mushrooms want to grow.
Yeah.
That's why I said if you're going in a tub, you let it go, you'll see it'll be covered. Like magic mushrooms drop kind of dark purple, black spores. It'll be everywhere if you
Yeah.
let it sit. And that's what I said earlier was different species of mushrooms have different colored spores. Like oysters will drop white spores. You'll see like white dust if you let oysters sporulate, or same thing with lion's mane mushrooms. Lion's mane drops white spores. You'll see white dust and white haze everywhere. And it's just mushroom spores. So that's a big thing when a lot of these people you'll see on YouTube, they have what they call the Martha tents. It's like a Martha Stewart brand grow tent. One big thing when you run mushroom tents like that is dealing with the mushroom spores. Like you have to exhaust them somewhere, and you also have to deal with the cleanup. They're going to clog your filters up and everything. And a lot of people are susceptible to spores. You know, they get breathing problems, but we're breathing in spores every day. We're full of mold and everything everywhere. Mold is a fungus, same thing. So spores, yeah. We were talking about spores. I forgot what we were really.
No,
what were we
you,
on?
you got into them.
Yeah. So spores, man. Spores.
No, but we touched on something that, you know, we have to address. Is somebody's growing in their cupboard, you know, you have to think of the ventilation, and a lot of people, that's probably one of the causes of failure, that they're not taking that issue.
I agree. I tell people that a lot. So they're like
And I
you
don't
said
know-
earlier. You said a lot of stuff does a lot better when you just let it be. You know, you're not looking at it every day. You're not spraying it every day. You're not feeding it every day. Magic mushrooms are so like resilient and vigorous that they do the best when you kind of just leave them alone. You give them what they need. They need some moisture, fresh air. But then, yeah, there are some people that are growing like in a still air environment, and the air will kind of get stale. So you need a little bit of at least a draft, because as I mentioned earlier, mushrooms they're exhaling CO2 through those gills under their caps, and they're inhaling the oxygen. So just like you know, if you put your head under a blanket too long, it gets kind of hard to breathe. So same thing. Yeah, people don't think about that when they grow in a closet or a cabinet. You need some sort of little bit of ventilation, and every
I'd imagine
species of
you-
mushroom has different parameters for that. Like I mentioned earlier, oyster mushrooms are very sensitive to the carbon dioxide buildup.
So is you're using a carbon filter for, like, because a lot of people have carbon filters, so I imagine people are going to be using for this. You'll be clogging it up by the spores really quickly.
Yeah, a lot of commercial growers who grow gourmet, that's part of their daily maintenance is just cleaning up mushroom spores out of their fruiting tents. It's just it's crazy. So I don't grow that much, obviously. I don't have to. Like what Mark said earlier, you end up with so many mushrooms. It's like I do some gourmet grows and I'll cook with them and stuff, but when you grow magic mushrooms, it's like, the hell am I gonna do with all of these now? Go spread them around the city, like here you go.
Yeah. little 90-second brand on it, you know.
Yeah, I've thought about that. Slap my QR code on it and leave it by the Uncle Ben bag on the store shelf. And
If you want to come to Montreal, that would be probably safer for you. You want to do that kind of practice.
I know, right? Yeah, but I've been to Canada when I was younger, and it was before you needed passports. I was a lot younger. You could just drive right through, but I was pretty young.
You know, in protest in Ottawa, what's going on with this vaccination stuff. There was one guy called Know You Grow was giving out free joints, and the cop was walking behind him, lighting people up in protest.
That's great.
You know? So that's how now it's not an issue anymore here.
There's another thing you brought up in that whole ventilation
amazing
thing was safety. I never really even thought about that. Well, I have, because I know when they're packaging the mycorrhizae and the beneficials, I've known that some of the guys have accidentally got these funguses in their eyes and have created like permanent damage in their eyes and other things like that. So I kind of know that there is hazards around these things, but I never really thought about the amount of spores they're releasing on a daily basis. And if you don't have proper ventilation, you are sensitive to these things, it could probably even cause like exacerbated, whether it's an allergic reaction or
Anything,
even
yeah.
asthma or any of these things,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Mark-
So I have asthma. I've had asthma since I was younger. And, like I said, I don't grow that much. I've never really done a full tent setup because I really don't have to. You've seen my channel. I grow a little bit at a time, whether it's magic or gourmet. So the spores don't bother me too much. Maybe I get a little bit here and there that I just wipe up, and I'm sure they're around the air where I live, but nothing you can really do other than if you're
Well
if you've got a
ventilated.
commercial grow going, you gotta ventilate it, keep it filtered.
Would
There,
a would a certain would maintaining a certain humidity, like vapor percentage within the air, keep from extra like sporulation like going out, like
I
similar
don't
to
think
like
so.
pollen?
So I remember reading something about this before. It's like if you try to keep the humidity up, I think the mushrooms, they're still just going to release the spores. It's just a natural part of the life
Okay.
cycle. So maybe if you keep the air ventilation down, they won't kind of fly around as much. They'll kind of just land, where they are. But a lot of what a lot of commercial growers do is they mix the fresh air with the humidity. So it's kind of blowing that fresh mist
Mm.
all the time. So it's always kind of blowing air around, and they've always got like an exhaust to try to keep it all over to the exhaust and filter out all the spores because it's just going to happen. Mushrooms they're going to sporulate.
this
Okay, yeah, because I was. Oh, sorry. I was just
no, go ahead.
thinking along the lines of I live in Arizona where it's really dry and there's like tons of pollen and stuff. And
Yeah, and the
when there's
dust and
more
all that.
air,
Yeah.
yeah, when there's more precipitation in the air, it kind of keeps that from flowing around. And kind of like with breeding and stuff, when there's more precipitation in the air, it keeps pollen from spreading. So I didn't know
That'd
if
be a
it
fun
was
experiment too, though.
along
If
those
if we could
lines.
So
if we
use
could
a
somehow,
mister in
yeah,
the room.
monitor humidity
You
and,
kept a
and
mister in the
sporulation
room.
to see if it correlates.
Because I
Yeah,
have
Rob,
asthma as well, so and I could really feel that in my lungs, kind of like how you can
I don't know if
probably
you
feel
think
it.
about it,
But
it's like, damn.
yeah, so
Hey,
here when there's no pollen, it's nice, but when there's a lot of pollen and it's dry in the air,
Yeah, it's
it
blowing all the
sucks.
dirt around. Yeah.
And then when there's precipitation in the air, it's like it's so much more. I don't know. It's a
Yeah,
lot easier.
mushrooms are
But
weird. They're used to growing in wet environments. That's how they grow. So I think that would be a fun experiment though to see if there's a way to maybe even get the spores to go where you want them to go instead of just all over the place.
so
what
why
do
does
you
it
mean
cool
by
to look
that
into.
exactly? What do you mean by that by having the spores? You mean directing them through your ventilation, and what do you mean going where?
Yeah, like if there's a way, so if you ever seen or scroll through Instagram, some mushroom accounts, uh there's some famous mushroom videos where they put a light behind a mushroom like out in the wild and they filmed it and you can see all the spores blowing around and in weird different directions because they're microscopic. And what you're seeing is like thousands of spores clumped together when you see like spore dust flying around. And the spores just kind of, it's crazy how they literally go everywhere. So if you can kind of control that, maybe that could be beneficial. And it's just part of mushroom growing is always going to be spore cleanup. There's just no way around it.
That's very interesting. This kind of leads into the next question is, what are the common mistakes to avoid? Which, yeah.
I brought the first one up is just caring too much and looking over them too much, like being a helicopter mushroom parent, like stuff that wants to grow, kind of let it do its thing. Number one mistake is people they're misting it too much, spraying too much water on their mushrooms and not letting them get enough fresh air, or they get too much fresh air because they're looking at them every day, trying to peek at it. And same thing when you let your grain colonize, whether it's a 90-second rice bag or not, it's great to just leave it alone, let it go weeks at a time before you come back to it because they're going to want to grow and they're going to do better without you messing with them all the time. But also when you mess with stuff so much, you can introduce forms of contamination because with mushroom growing, there's a lot of sterile substrates and sterile grains. One wrong move, one wrong spore that gets in there, it can ruin the whole thing. So number one mistake is always just let it be, like let it go. And what we call it in the mushroom world is neglect tech, the neglect technique, where you just neglect it and it just goes so much better than when you're just always checking in on stuff. The other mistake is always not going with reliable vendors for your spores or cultures or anything else. So I have on my website, it's 90secondmycology.com, but I have a page called Mushroom Links and Resources. So it's 90secondmycology.com/links. And I've got a mycology vendor section that can get beginners started with reliable and reputable vendors, based on community testimony and of course my own experience. And the number one failure with this stuff is people getting like syringes and stuff off of Reddit from people who see how easy it is to spore print a mushroom and then create a syringe and sell it, but they're not doing it in the best clean conditions. So the number two, like, failure is always a bad syringe. So, you always, when you're a brand new cultivator, the first thing you learn about is, I got to get a spore syringe. And then you go, well, that could be 90-second rice or any other grain. But if you start with a bad syringe, whether it's going to be spores or culture, that's going to ruin the whole thing. If it's already contaminated at the source, that's it. You got to get a new syringe. And a lot of beginners don't think about that. They think, the 90-second rice was contaminated. Oh, it sucks. I hate this technique. And it's because it was the syringe the whole time. So there's always different factors like that. Those are two main things is always bad syringes. And then just letting it be. Don't focus too much on the little details. Like we talked about earlier, new people to anything, they focus too much on little details and they go crazy.
They fixate on it. And they fixate on on the smallest of details that have the least impact and are the most insignificant.
Because they read one thing and they go, that's it. I read this, now my brain is all about this. And what if this and that? So the one thing I brought up, I just did a live stream on my channel 2 weeks ago now with another mushroom YouTuber. His name is Gary. He has a commercial company in Colorado, fresh from the farm fungi. And we brought up how everybody goes on these forums. Like, a lot of people are familiar with truemery.org. And a lot of these people have different questions and they want different experiments. Like we started this off with, hey, could I use, spent cannabis byproduct as like straw or mushroom substrate? People will reply and say, no, it's not going to work. And they go, okay. And they'll never try it because they took someone's word for it, or they read something negative about it and never actually tried it themselves. So part of it is just getting out there and doing it yourself. I know we live in a digital age. It's great to still keep like a notebook and a pen or pencil. It's always great to just write stuff down, like physically take your own notes and just keep your own experiments going like that. Don't read too much into details. Kind of make your own connections and links in your brain, and then kind of go off of that, and don't focus too much on what other people have to say.
Become a master of observation through your own experience.
Yeah, pretty much.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I really love that. The kind of leads into one of the other questions that we had was, what are the 2 or 3 of the best species to start with on the magic side, and then 2 or 3 on the edible side?
Oh yeah. So, well, for the edibles, I mentioned earlier, number one go-to for beginners is always going to be oyster mushrooms. Oyster mushrooms, again, no pun intended, are just like weeds. They are so prolific. They want to grow. They will eat almost anything, but they grow the best on a straw-based substrate. So oyster mushrooms, and then there's also the Pio mushroom, also known as black poplar. That's also an edible gourmet. It's what we call a wood lover, but it will also perform pretty well on straw and other substrates. But for the most part, a lot of gourmet mushrooms are wood lovers. So you need like a wood-based substrate, something like hardwood fuel pellets or sawdust that you supplement with something like wheat bran, or we use like soybean hulls, the byproduct of growing soybeans and getting the oil and all of that out of them. So oysters and Pio mushrooms. And if you have good genetics, you could maybe grow chestnut mushrooms without some wood. That's up for debate as well. But number one, oysters to get started with gourmet. Magic mushrooms, the number one in the market, the species is always going to be the Psilocybe cubensis, or some people say Psilocybe cubensis. It's so resilient, it grows on almost anything now. You can imagine out in the wild, people found this, the stereotypical like cow dung patties out in a field. And now we've brought it indoors to where it grows on brown rice and cocoa coir. And it's like, there are other magic mushroom species, but they're a little bit more advanced to where you need to get into the manure, or also wood chips again, wood substrates. The main magic mushroom for indoor cultivation is Psilocybe cubensis. So other than that, there's really not too much for a beginner to try to get away from, because as a beginner, you'll see different what we call strain names. And I know in the cannabis world, everybody has a strain name, but in the end, it's all the same species. So you'll have somebody who starts a grow from spores and they come up with this weird mushroom phenotype, and they'll clone it a couple times and then take a spore print and name it whatever they want. Like, oh, the Big Daddy strain, when it's really just cubensis. That's all it is. So a lot of beginners get lost in these strain names and they go, oh, I'm growing B plus today or whatever. And it's like, in the end, it's just Psilocybe cubensis. There's really nothing different about it.
So I've been envious of penis envy, and it's just all the same strains.
So yeah, penis envy is still Psilocybe cubensis that was mutated. I forgot the story of it. Penis envies and albinos are a little bit of an exception. You see how different they look, obviously, but it's still the same species. They say they're a little more potent, and in my experience, they are. And we don't know why. They just take a lot longer to grow, so maybe they have more time to produce the alkaloids, but it's still the same species. So that's the only exception. If you want to grow something a little bit different, you want to move on from regular, what we call cubes, short for cubensis, regular cubes, to penis envy cubes. It's a little bit of a step up. And then from there, a lot of people move on to Pinnalia cyanescens, which grows on manure. So you go kind of like regular cubes, penis envy, Pinnalia cyanescens mushrooms. And then from there, you get into even more potent mushrooms like the azarescens and Psilocybe cyanescens, which people confuse with Pinnalia cyanescens, but Psilocybe cyanescens is a wood-loving magic mushroom as well. That's when you really have to get into using pressure cookers and sterilizing substrates, because we can get away with using the cocoa coir alone without a pressure cooker because it's not really nutritious. Once you get into using wood and other substrates, manure, that stuff can contaminate pretty easily, and you really want to sterilize it. But yeah, penis, that was good you brought the penis envy up, because that's always a number two thing is always penis envy, but it's still Psilocybe cubensis. Still the same species.
I brought it up because I'm immature.
Yeah, and it's great when you start typing penis into Google, even though you know what you're looking for, you're not going to get, you got to finish envy mushroom, or you're not going to get what you want.
You're not going to get what you want at all.
Just like here in the United States, we have a sporting goods store, Dick's.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard of this. Dick's Sporting Goods. You gotta type in Dick's Sporting Goods. Don't go to Dicks.com. It's not gonna work.
Sporting good dick.
Yeah, you gotta be careful.
Just two real quick points is it sounds like this lower level is where it's like we're trying to do it ourselves and become the chemists and the biologists, kind of like what we talked about in the Canada environment. It's like, stop sterilizing everything, stop, like put nitrogen, put phosphorus,
don't think
potassium.
About it too much.
Yeah.
Just don't think about it.
And it starts off there. It's the lowest quality potent material. But as you go more organic, to going back to the cow poop, it sounds like it's getting better quality. And am I hearing that correctly?
That's true. So you're still you're able to grow with simple methods. Like I said earlier, seed to soil, you're going to grow cannabis. Same thing with mushrooms. You do it right, even with basic materials, like I show you on my channel, basic cheap materials, you're going to get mushrooms. But if you you get a few grows under your belt, you can improve it. You get into the organic materials like manure, sterilized manure, other natural things. Like, I don't know if you guys use a lot of azomite with cannabis. That's now coming back into the mushroom industry. Like, let's start adding azomite to our mushroom substrates. What kind of minerals are the mushrooms going to get from that, and how can we improve the yields with that?
Use worm castings at all? Use
What'd you
worm
say?
castings at all?
Oh, a lot of people do. Yeah, yeah, a lot
Okay.
of that's another good one. Worm castings. Usually it's manure, worm casting. Now it's azomite. Gypsum is always a staple in the substrate when you move on from just the pure coco coir. It's always like
Azomite's
gypsum,
cool.
worm
It's
casting.
like volcanic trace minerals. So
Yeah, the
it's
azomite.
that's why
The
that's why a lot of plants survive out here in the deserts, because it's like old volcanic land. So there's old
Yeah,
volcanic dust in the soils, and that's how like a lot of these plants are still able to gain their trace minerals.
that's crazy. Well, the
there
thing now with manure is people can just like go to Walmart now and get a bag of manure for plants. Like same thing with worm castings. There's like a bag of worm castings in the garden aisle at a Walmart. That's stuff that really wasn't always around for people just to use
Yeah,
to grow mushrooms and stuff. You had to go like harvest your own horse crap, dry it out in the sun and use it to grow mushrooms, or know somebody who had a farm. But yeah, horse manure works well too.
that was the next thing actually. I was one of the questions I had is what do you feed your plants, or what do you, I mean, what do you feed the mushrooms? And it sounds like giving them all, like feeding your it's the same thing with growing natural canna, is feed to the soil the microbes, and the microbes will feed the mycology.
Yeah, it's a little different because when we prepare the substrate, it's got everything in it already. That's all you need right there, and you're gonna fruit tons of mushrooms. There are some experiments people like to do, kind of like growing plants. What if we add nutrition later on? That's something I've never experimented with, but normally when you make your substrate, it's got everything in it that the mushrooms need. So like a basic like beginner's magic mushroom substrate is just 100% coco coir, pasteurized and hydrated with decolonized brown rice put into it. Then you can kind of get more experience. Then you can experiment with adding some gypsum and vermiculite. Obviously, the vermiculite doesn't add any nutrition. It just helps retain moisture because mushrooms are like 95% water. So the more moisture you have in the substrate, the more mushroom mass you can get. Then you can move on to the manure. Like manure is very nutritious from the diet that the animals have, especially horse manure. It's all pretty much hay, organic plants or oats, everything like that. So there's also there was an idea, I think it was Paul Stamets, like to increase potency. Paul Stamets was saying, well, what if we add like other tryptamines to the substrate later on in the life cycle? You know, pretty much just grind up other magic mushrooms and throw them into the soil because that contains tryptamines, or like the what is it, mimosa bark that you use to extract DMT, if you guys are familiar with that, also contains tryptamines. What if you add that to the substrate later on? Or what if you even, what we do in between flushes of mushrooms is we soak the substrate to rehydrate the substrate for more flushes. What if we actually add nutrition to the water we use to soak the substrate? I think there's a lot of room to experiment with that in the mushroom world to see,
you can do
there's no right way to do anything, obviously, but how can we keep improving yields, commercially, even just for a personal grower to experiment with?
I
I have
real fast. I apologize. My point is just talking to you. There's a number of things after listening to. I would love to get a couple of products in your hands to see if you want to do some experiments. One being the drops of balance. Drops of balance is, and I don't know if this would even work or not. It's an ionic sulfated mineral product. That's water soluble. As you put it in the water, it has all your trace minerals. It's all water soluble. It also cleans water too. So I'd love to put it in there. It reverts all man-made. I don't want to say all, but so far 4,500 man-made chemicals back to sulfated minerals.
Wow.
So I'd love to get that product in your hand. Then I would also love to get pit moss. Have you ever heard of pit moss?
Oh yeah. It's like a lot of people will use that in place of the coco coir, either for like a casing layer, what we call casing. That's another thing to get into, or kind of like a full substrate. A lot of people moved on from that because the coco coir is so readily available now. It's just the coconut byproduct that's all over. And doesn't the peat moss take like a long time to grow and they got to harvest it?
Well, it's not peat moss, it's pit moss. Pit moss. It's
Oh, okay. So I'm thinking of something else.
and you were thinking correctly on the pit moss or the peat moss. The peat moss is material you'll find at the bottom of like a 3-foot water logged area.
Right. Yeah. Like, yeah.
And then the
Magnum.
sphagnum peat moss. And then the pit moss, it is washed, recycled paper, and that retains water, and it's cardboard basically. And I don't know if that would be an interesting growing media that you could play with.
I have a cardboard video on my channel actually. You can grow mushrooms on cardboard. It takes a little more effort.
Yeah,
Because
but this,
cardboard, like you said, it's just paper. You need to kind of supplement it with some extra nutrition.
yeah, Mark didn't mention one of the qualities of this product is it holds a lot of water. Like we had a grower go, I think it was 7 days or 11 days without watering. And
Without watering? Oh, wow.
Mhm.
So that could be
Yeah, right.
that might be able to replace vermiculite. You could probably use that in place of vermiculite.
Exactly.
Hey, that's right. It was a couple of days. How long was it? Do you remember?
I think it was almost 12 days, actually.
Almost 12 days. Oh, it was 11 days for sure. I'm pretty sure. But it
Yeah,
was
like we don't water mushroom substrates like you would a typical like soil with a plant. You just kind of mist the surface, since mushrooms are the best time to go looking for mushrooms out in the wild is after it rains, right? So it's like the surface of the substrate with the colonized mycelium loves to be constantly kind of moist and wet, and the substrate itself is still holding a lot of the moisture. So we don't really water it during the fruiting cycle. What we do is what I said earlier is we'll dunk the substrate in between flushes and kind of soak it for a couple hours to absorb a little more moisture. But then the flushes come out of that with, it could be a couple weeks in between having to dunk it again, or I guess you can think of it as like watering it, kind of like a plant soil. So that could be interesting to play around with too in place of vermiculite. Use that pit moss like that.
And the last one was the, like Mike was talking about, we're building an entire sitcom around the other things you can produce from the canna plant, right? And Mike is working specifically on flour. He's working on actually his own brand that we're hoping to support and market for this next upcoming year. Like he said, he's a large outdoor commercial grower, and so we're hoping to see that will be another byproduct that can further keep extracting from this plant, as well as like he was saying, I'm still learning because he's really on the forefront of this, is other medias that can potentially come from this plant as well. And so I kind of have 4 experiments. I would really love for Perfect Gardens to follow up with you this year on other things. Would that be okay with you if we get these products?
Oh yeah, I'm down to, it'd be so cool to merge these two worlds, on these two platforms. And we both have a platform, and make it official though. You don't see too many channels. Maybe somebody will mention it here and there. Oh, this and that, cannabis mushrooms, but they're 2 different industries for sure. And if we can combine them like this, all the byproduct of cannabis and all of that with the mushrooms.
Yeah.
I'll say it right now. I would love to start to work with you because, like I said, I don't want to feed a whole bunch of complicated crap down people's throat where they never
right away
get started.
And they go, oh, fuck these mushrooms. That's
exactly.
Crazy,
how you do it is the guy I want to go to on where we start the foundation of education on getting these mushrooms going. And from there, let it grow.
This just popped into my head. We're talking about the byproduct of cannabis, but there's also the byproduct of commercial mushroom production. We end up with these spent substrates.
Yeah.
What a lot of people do. Yeah. What a lot of people do, they just start a compost pile out in their backyard. Like I live in an apartment, so I've been wanting to do more outdoor content, and hopefully in the future I can, get a nice mushroom house or whatever with a nice backyard. I've been wanting to do more outdoor content like that. So a lot of people will compost their own substrates out in their backyard and let it break down. Sometimes it'll still even fruit some more mushrooms after a rainstorm because there's still some nutrition left in those substrates. A lot of people will compost that, break it down, and use it as fertilizer in their regular garden beds for their vegetables and stuff. So it kind of just repeats the cycle. So then if you got the plant material left over from the cannabis as well, combined maybe with leftover mushroom substrate, which depending on the species, we could have been using wood or the cocoa coir or a manure. It's all one big compost pile. And there is, like the common white button mushroom you buy at the grocery store, that's kind of hard to cultivate at home because it's like a composted manure substrate with the right microbe content and everything going on with it. A lot of commercial farmers have it broken down, good to go. But that could be something to experiment with, is how do we combine these two different substrates, these two different mediums, leftover mushroom byproducts, leftover cannabis byproducts? What else can we do with that? How do we keep the cycle growing?
There's one thing that's been just in the back of my mind as we've been talking, and I could be completely wrong on this, but I don't think so. I think the future fertilizers that are going to be used are going to come from insects and mushrooms, primarily in the future. And I could be wrong on this.
About it, you've already got the mycorrhizae that you use all the time with cannabis. Trichoderma mold, all the mushroom growers hate, but we know trichoderma is great for plant roots. As soon as you see green when you're growing mushrooms, green means stop. That's it. You're done. You can't. It's contaminated. But green with the plants, great. So two different worlds collide, but it's great.
That's a good tip.
Frank, this has been such an amazing conversation.
Oh, I know. We lost track
this.
of time. Like every time I talk about mushrooms, we just go forever.
I need to ask one question.
Sure. Absolutely, Mike.
Yeah.
I apologize.
Okay. I have 1,800 acres of farmland. Okay. And every year my surplus hay, I have a guy giving me top dollar buying my haylage that's 1, 2, or 3 years old. What is he doing with it?
Man, that's really, who knows? Maybe he's growing mushrooms.
No, he is growing mushrooms. He's growing chanterelles.
Oh, so he's probably, okay, so he's got probably an outdoor bed because those grow outdoors. Like there's like morels, the chanterelles, like the common red and white fly agaric, Amanita muscaria. Those mushrooms, like we spoke about earlier, they work with the roots outside with trees and plants to form their fruiting bodies. So the only way to really grow chanterelles or morels or anything like that is outside. So maybe he has acres himself of just like chanterelle patches he's got going with the grass and trees around using that stuff.
I don't know, but
Or you can always just ask him to come
I
over.
do, but he won't
See what
answer.
you do.
He just comes out of his wallet and pays me and puts the hay on his truck and leaves as fast as he can. And then
Or
every
he's got
fall,
horses to feed, maybe. I don't know.
Maybe it's horses speed. I love it.
no,
Yeah.
you can't feed with that anymore. It's like it's almost mush when I pick it up with the tractor. But he loves
right,
it.
yeah.
He'll pay me like the stuff I don't. After a year and a half, I won't feed it to my horses. So I have race horses,
Right.
and he'll pay it, and he'll come and pick it up a year later. Checks it.
That's very interesting.
And
Everybody has their own system. Maybe he worked out a system with that stuff and he's got a good grow going.
he's been buying it. So
Frank,
Yeah.
I appreciate you coming on this channel so much, and I am so excited that we've created a couple action steps and a few ideas around how to stay connected and continue this
sure.
relationship. Because, like I said, I think you're the guy I want to give attention to on our platform on launching this, really getting started with mushrooms. Guys, only on Perfect Garden TV. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Have a great grow, everyone. What is it all about?
Sure, absolutely. The Lost Coast Plant Therapy is, I believe they're based in California, and I know they have a pretty big market share in some places. Essentially, we'll go over the ingredients first, and then we'll go through the instructions and go a little bit about it. It is another one of the ones that has oils.